The Roosevelt debate hall hadn't seen this much tension in years. Rows of polished wood seats filled with professors, students, journalists, and media elites, all buzzing with anticipation. At the center of it all was a stage flanked by 2 podiums and 1 long table. Cameras were rolling, social media feeds were live, and the crowd knew tonight would be more than a polite policy discussion. It wasn't just another panel on media ethics, it was a confrontation everyone secretly hoped would combust. Karoline Leavitt, the youngest White House press secretary in American history, stepped into the hall without fanfare. No entourage, no performance. Just her signature navy suit, heels clicking softly on the marble floor, and a face that betrayed zero hesitation. At the far end of the stage, Jimmy Kimmel leaned back in his seat with the comfortable grin of a man used to being the sharpest voice in the room. He waved to the audience as some students whooped and cheered. He was the face of cultural cool. She was the symbol of disciplined defiance. As Karoline took her seat at the panel, a hush spread. No handshake yet. No smile, just a glance across the table, measured, quiet, and unflinching. The moderator began introductions. But the room's attention had already locked onto the invisible current pulsing between the 2 figures. There was a feeling in the air that even those unfamiliar with politics could sense. One of them would leave changed. And despite the noise, despite the odds, Karoline didn't look like someone who had come to survive this. She looked like someone who had come to take the room. Calm, centered, steady. The camera zoomed in, and just before the first question was asked, Karoline simply nodded once. As if to say, "I'm ready. Let's begin." The Roosevelt debate hall was a study in contrasts. Generational, ideological, and cultural. On one side of the room sat Columbia's journalism students and progressive faculty members, many of whom had spent the past decade immersed in the language of satire, activism, and media critique. They whispered excitedly, some already recording on their phones, eager to capture a viral moment. On the other side sat older guests, alumni, working professionals, a handful of veterans and small business owners invited for balance. They wore expressions of quiet skepticism, arms folded, many doubtful that the evening would offer anything more than another elite echo chamber. Between these 2 groups sat the stage, lit just enough to blur the border between academic forum and national spectacle. The moderator, Dr. Dana Wexler, a respected but ideologically safe dean of journalism, cleared her throat and began the formal welcome. "Tonight's forum," she said, "is not about performance, it's about truth, media, and democracy, facts and interpretation." Her words were carefully chosen, but everyone in the room knew better. Truth was about to become a battlefield. Jimmy Kimmel sat relaxed, legs crossed, already joking with a student in the front row. He was the darling of late-night television, the man who'd built a career on eviscerating politicians with a smirk. The students loved him. To them, he wasn't just a comedian, he was a truth-teller, a cultural warrior with a monologue that could take down anyone. Then there was Karoline Leavitt. Seated 2 chairs away, straight-backed and composed, she looked out over the audience with a gaze that didn't try to please, it measured. She wasn't here to entertain, she was here to defend. To many in the room, she represented the voice of an administration they disliked. But to others, especially those watching online across the country, she was the first person in years to step into enemy territory without apology. The stakes were enormous, though unspoken. For Karoline, this wasn't just about defending policy, it was about showing that the truth didn't belong to the media, or to the stage, or to the laughter. For Kimmel, it was a chance to do what he did best, dismantle an opponent in front of a live crowd. But tonight, the crowd wasn't unified. The divide was deep, and it wouldn't take long before the whole nation felt it. The first blow didn't come with volume, it came with timing. Jimmy Kimmel leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table, his tone relaxed and affable as the moderator finished her opening remarks. "Well," he began with that trademark grin, "I must say it's an honor to be here tonight, though I have to admit, I'm surprised our guest from the White House managed to find the place without a GPS updated by government contract." The crowd erupted in laughter. Students hooted, even a few faculty chuckled, caught off guard by how quickly the line landed. Kimmel didn't pause. He'd opened the gate, now he was riding through it. Turning to Karoline, he added with faux sincerity, "But really, Ms. Leavitt, it must be hard translating tweets into policy. Tell me, do you ever wake up and say, 'Wow, I can't believe I get paid to explain that one'?" The camera cut to Karoline. She didn't flinch. No reaction, just a slight tilt of the head, as if observing a performance she'd seen before. Kimmel continued, emboldened by the crowd. "I mean, let's be honest, press secretary in 2024 is like being a magician, right? Except instead of pulling rabbits out of hats, you're pulling excuses out of economic charts." The crowd roared again. A few even applauded. Kimmel glanced around, pleased with the energy. He was in familiar territory. On stage, commanding the room, using wit as his weapon. To the students, he was on fire. To millions watching live on the university's stream, this was classic Kimmel. Irreverent, smart, impossible to pin down. The kind of voice that cut through political noise with humor. But across from him, Karoline Leavitt remained still. Her composure, far from wooden, felt almost surgical. She waited. Not because she was rattled, but because she knew something Kimmel didn't. Timing cuts both ways. The moderator, sensing the rising temperature, tried to steer the conversation towards substance. "Let's begin with the role of public communication in times of national uncertainty," Dr. Wexler said. But the crowd was still buzzing, and Kimmel, smiling, interrupted with one last dig. "Yes, please, let's hear how memes and sarcasm are ruining democracy. From someone whose boss once tweeted that wind turbines cause cancer." That line brought the loudest laugh yet. Phones came up, recording. Karoline finally moved. She uncrossed her legs, sat a little straighter, and allowed the barest trace of a smile. But it wasn't amusement. It was recognition. He'd just played his strongest card. And she was still holding hers. Karoline Leavitt let the laughter fade. She didn't try to interrupt it, didn't rush to respond. She waited, like a surgeon waits for the patient to go still before making the first cut. When she finally spoke, her voice was low, firm, and free of theatrics. "You're right, Jimmy," she said, meeting his gaze across the table. "It is a tough job, but not because of tweets. It's tough because while you're making jokes, some of us are actually working to keep this country standing." The room stilled. No one expected her to start like that. Kimmel's grin faltered slightly. Karoline continued, her words measured but razor-sharp. "Since the start of this administration, we've added 2.3 million new manufacturing jobs according to the Department of Labor. Domestic steel production is up 25%, unemployment is at 3.5%, the lowest in half a century, and yes, we've had to make hard calls. We've had to face real economic storms. But while you edit punchlines for air, we deal with the fallout that affects real people, people who don't sit in rooms like this." There was a pause, not from her but from the audience. Some students looked at each other. Professors leaned forward. A few murmurs rippled from the back. Kimmel tried to inject levity again. "Stats are fun," he said, raising an eyebrow. "I just hope they're as real as your boss's golf handicap." But the punch didn't land. Karoline didn't take the bait. Instead, she leaned slightly toward the microphone. "Jimmy," she said, voice like steel, "do you know how many American steelworkers lost their jobs between 2000 and 2015 because of cheap foreign imports? 500,000. Do you know where they live? Pennsylvania, Ohio, Indiana. Not Hollywood, not Manhattan. They don't get Netflix specials, they get pink slips." Now it was quiet. Even the moderator, previously intervening, said nothing. Karoline went on, never raising her voice, never appealing to applause. "We brought those jobs back. Not for a headline, not for a monologue, but because we believe in rebuilding this country from the inside out. Maybe that's boring to some people. Maybe it doesn't fit your nightly script. But for the people who have food on the table tonight because of it, it matters." Somewhere in the back, a man, mid-50s, gray-hailed, maybe a veteran, began to clap. A few others followed. Slowly, pockets of the audience joined in. It wasn't thunderous, but it was real. Kimmel shifted in his seat, clearly sensing the shift. The charm offensive had met its wall. Karoline didn't gloat. She didn't smile. She simply closed her folder of notes, rested her hands on the table, and looked straight at Kimmel. "So, you can keep telling jokes, Jimmy, but I'll keep telling the truth. And we'll see which one the country needs more." No one laughed. What followed wasn't applause, it was stillness, the kind of stillness that says, something just changed. The air in Roosevelt Hall had shifted. What began as entertainment was now something heavier, tense, uncertain, and utterly unpredictable. Jimmy Kimmel, still seated with the posture of confidence, tried once more to regain his footing. "I'll give you this, Karoline," he said, flashing his signature grin. "You've got a good poker face, but come on, don't you ever get tired of defending the indefensible? Tweets, tariffs, gas prices up 30%. You call that leadership?" His tone was sharper now, the humor edged with frustration. The students laughed, but the laughter was uneven. The punchlines were starting to feel recycled, like ammunition that had lost its charge. Karoline didn't respond right away. She looked at Kimmel, then slowly turned her gaze toward the crowd. Row after row of students, professors, working-class guests, and cameras capturing every second. Her voice, when it came, was soft but unwavering. "You keep asking me if I'm tired, Jimmy," she said, "but maybe you should be asking yourself. Are you proud of what you're doing? Turning every serious issue into a skit? Mocking people who actually get up every morning and do the work?" The audience quieted again. And then she leaned forward, not with aggression but clarity. "Truth doesn't need applause," she said, her voice slicing through the auditorium. "It doesn't need a laugh track. It doesn't need editing or a lighting crew or viral hashtags. It just needs someone willing to stand up and say it, even when it's not popular. Especially then." There was a stillness. No one cheered. Yet. But every person in that room felt it. That line wasn't scripted, it wasn't spin, it was conviction. And for the first time all evening, it wasn't Jimmy Kimmel controlling the crowd, it was her. Then she did something no one expected. Karoline calmly reached to the microphone clipped to her lapel, unfastened it, and set it down on the table. Not in defiance, not in anger, but in quiet finality. She stood, nodded once to the moderator, and turned to leave the stage. A wave of murmurs swept the hall, then applause, scattered at first, then rising like a tide. Phones shot up, cameras zoomed in. The crowd, divided just minutes ago, now watched in stunned silence as Karoline Leavitt walked off the stage, not storming out, but striding out with purpose. Jimmy Kimmel stared after her, smile frozen but eyes uncertain. He hadn't just lost the exchange, he'd lost the room, and somewhere deep down he knew. She wasn't walking away because she lost control. She was walking away because she had won. For a moment the room sat in stunned silence, the kind that follows a lightning strike, sharp, breathless, and impossible to ignore. Karoline Leavitt's quiet walk-off had left behind a vacuum, and the Roosevelt Debate Hall felt like it was teetering on the edge of something larger than a university forum. Then it happened. A man in the back stood up and clapped. Slowly, deliberately, a few others joined, then dozens. Applause erupted like a fault line giving way. Some students stood, uncertain whether to cheer or sneer. Professors glanced at one another, some impressed, others visibly rattled. But no one could pretend the moment hadn't landed with force. The moderator, Dr. Dana Wexler, tried to regain control, leaning into her microphone. "Let's please remain respectful," she urged, but her voice was barely audible over the growing murmur. Kimmel remained seated, his smile flickering as he looked around, absorbing the reversal. This was his arena, entertainment, crowd control, mastery of tone. And yet something had shifted that he couldn't joke away. His eyes scanned the room. The faces had changed. The expressions weren't just surprised, they were introspective, conflicted. One of the student panelists tried to salvage the flow. "Perhaps we can continue the conversation," he began, but was cut off by a woman near the front who stood and shouted, "She spoke the truth. That's what this was supposed to be about." A handful of students booed, others shushed. The hall devolved into a low roar of debate, shouts, and cell phones recording every angle. The event had officially become more than a panel. It was a cultural collision, unfolding live. Backstage, event staff were scrambling. One technician whispered into a headset, "She just walked off, and the room's with her." A university administrator leaned over to a producer from the livestream crew. "We've lost the narrative." The producer replied flatly, "No, we've changed it." Jimmy Kimmel tried to steady the energy. "Well, that's one way to end a conversation," he quipped, raising an eyebrow. A few loyal fans chuckled, but it was thin. The line fell flat, a shadow of his earlier dominance. He looked toward the empty chair where Karoline had been, now lit by a soft halo of stage lights, and for the first time that night, he seemed small beneath their glare. The room didn't explode with rage, it exploded with realization that this wasn't just a debate between a comedian and a press secretary, it was something deeper, a symbolic confrontation between two Americas, one that laughs and one that works, one that performs and one that perseveres. And in that moment, as students debated, faculty fumbled, and Kimmel sat still behind the desk, it was clear. Karoline Leavitt didn't just walk off a stage, she walked into history. By the time Karoline Leavitt stepped into her car outside the Roosevelt Debate Hall, the internet had already detonated. Within minutes, the clip of her removing her mic and walking off the stage began to circulate, first on Twitter, then TikTok, Instagram, YouTube Shorts. Someone added dramatic music. Another looped the phrase, "Truth doesn't need applause," with captions in bold white font. The hashtag #LeaveItUnfiltered surged to the top of trending lists nationwide, overtaking celebrity gossip, sports recaps, and even breaking news headlines. Conservative commentators hailed the moment as a media reckoning. "She didn't storm out," one tweet read. "She walked out with authority, and the whole room knew it." That post alone hit 1.2 million views in under 2 hours. Fox News cut in with a breaking segment calling the event the most brutal takedown of media arrogance in years. Newsmax ran with a chyron that read, "Leavitt destroys Kimmel on live stage, truth greater than laughter." Meanwhile, on Reddit, a 3,000 comment thread titled, "She didn't just win, she exposed the game," dominated r/conservative, while even neutral subs debated the fallout. Clips of Kimmel's stunned expression became instant memes. One showed him blinking in silence, captioned, "When the punchline punches back." But what stunned analysts most was the cross-demographic impact. Even Gen Z creators, many who had never heard of Karoline Leavitt, were posting edits of the moment, calling it iconic, stone cold, and the kind of energy we need in politics. One TikTok, using slow-motion footage of her removing her mic with triumphant orchestral music, reached 5 million views overnight. Instagram was flooded with fan art, reposts, and a new slogan emerging like wildfire: "Truth doesn't need a stage." Meanwhile, Jimmy Kimmel's team was in full containment mode. The show's official Twitter account posted a photo of Jimmy behind the desk, trying to keep the tone light, now accepting GPS directions from Karoline Leavitt. But the joke failed to land. Comments poured in, most of them brutal. "She wasn't lost, Jimmy, you were," one read. YouTube reaction videos sprang up within hours, one from a conservative influencer titled, "This is the moment the media lost control," hit 750,000 views by sunrise. Another, from a usually apolitical millennial creator, said simply, "She made me want to understand what the administration's actually doing." And that's powerful. Leavitt's own social media accounts exploded. Her follower count on X, formerly Twitter, grew by 200,000 overnight. A single post, just 3 words, "Thanks for listening," racked up over 1 million engagements. Comment after comment echoed the same sentiment. "You made me proud to be American. Finally, someone with backbone. You walked off, but you didn't back down." What happened in that debate hall didn't stay in New York. It bled into every timeline, inbox, and headline, and for millions watching from living rooms, break rooms, and bar stools across the country, one thing was now crystal clear. Karoline Leavitt didn't need the microphone. The truth was loud enough. By the next evening, Jimmy Kimmel walked onto his studio stage not with swagger, but with something more cautious, measured. The applause was there, but lighter, more polite than roaring. The viral footage of Karoline Leavitt's walk-off had reached tens of millions, and for once, The king of late-night satire wasn't the one commanding the cultural narrative. He opened with a smile, but there was hesitation in his eyes. "Well," he quipped, "tonight we'll keep it light. I think one national takedown per week is enough, don't you?" A few chuckles, but it wasn't enough to break the tension. In his monologue, he tried to reframe the Roosevelt incident as just a spirited debate, but viewers and his own studio crew knew better. The tone of the night had changed. Backstage, the mood was grimmer. Producers debated whether to even mention Leavitt again. A segment writer whispered, "We brought punchlines, she brought proof." Preliminary Nielsen ratings showed a dip, 10% lower than the week prior. Paired with a spike in negative sentiment online, advertisers were starting to murmur. Brands tied to blue-collar and middle American demographics were uneasy about being associated with the fallout. "This isn't just a bad bit," one executive said behind closed doors. "It's a branding fracture." More troubling for Kimmel, however, was the realization that his usual playbook hadn't worked. He'd faced off with politicians before, mocked, parodied, and dominated, but Karoline didn't play to his script. She didn't yell, didn't flinch, didn't even stay for the rebound. She left the stage and took the narrative with her. His weapon, sarcasm, had backfired, and no laugh track could cover that. In private, a staffer overheard him mutter, "I didn't expect her to be that sharp." Publicly, he offered a mild, scripted line, "I respect anyone who shows up and stands their ground. I guess we both did." But the damage was done. For perhaps the first time in his career, Jimmy Kimmel had become the punchline. 2 days after the Roosevelt showdown, Karoline Leavitt stepped behind the White House press podium with a calm authority that felt unmistakably different. She wore a charcoal suit, clean lines, understated but commanding. Reporters, usually sharp and aggressive, seemed more cautious today, as if still processing the storm she had weathered and won. The room, always tense, held a strange energy, part curiosity, part respect. When the first question came, it wasn't about foreign policy or budget numbers. It was about the moment that had rocked the media world. Miss Leavitt, a reporter from CBS, asked, "Do you regret walking off the stage during the Columbia Forum with Jimmy Kimmel?" Karoline didn't blink. Her reply was immediate, unshaken. "No," she said, voice firm and steady. "I went there to speak the truth, and I did. I didn't leave because I was overwhelmed. I left because I'd said what needed to be said, and I don't need stage lights to prove it." A ripple of quiet spread across the room. Some reporters lowered their pens, others exchanged glances, a few even nodded, subtly but undeniably. In that moment it was clear she wasn't just holding the line, she had redrawn it. Throughout the briefing she fielded questions with confidence and control, weaving in facts, policy, and purpose without theatrics. Gone were the usual gotcha moments from the press corps. Instead, there was an air of reluctant admiration. She'd gone into a hostile setting, faced one of media's sharpest figures, and walked out unscathed. No, stronger. It wasn't just about winning a debate anymore. It was about proving that conviction, composure, and truth still had a place in modern politics. By the time she left the podium, the White House feed had already gone viral again. Commentators across the spectrum were forced to acknowledge it. Karoline Leavitt hadn't just recovered, she'd ascended. And in doing so, she'd reminded the nation that real strength doesn't shout, it stands, it endures, and sometimes it walks away, only to return taller than ever. As the dust settled, the headlines faded, and the hashtags slowly slipped from trending lists, one truth remained. Karoline Leavitt hadn't just spoken to a room in New York, she had spoken to a nation. More specifically, she had spoken to the men often left behind in the modern political conversation. The steelworker in Pennsylvania, the rancher in Montana, the small business owner in Missouri, trying to make payroll in a world that no longer seems to speak his language. She wasn't flashy. She didn't shout. She didn't appeal to viral culture or influencer approval. She simply stood her ground, spoke facts, and walked away, not to retreat, but to return to the real work, the kind that never makes the headlines, but keeps the country running. Her walk-off was more than defiance, it was a declaration. that men who build, fight, fix, farm, and raise families still matter, that their concerns are not jokes, their values are not punchlines, and their livelihoods are not fodder for ratings. In a culture saturated with sarcasm and spectacle, Karoline offered something rare: clarity without arrogance, power without performance, and truth without apology. And that's why the moment endured, because for millions of Americans, especially men who have felt silenced, sidelined, or spoken down to, Karoline didn't just win a debate, she stood up for them when no one else would. In the days that followed, the messages poured in. "You said what I've been wanting to say. Thank you for not backing down. My daughter watched you and now she wants to serve too." This wasn't a political stunt, it was a cultural shift. A reminder that dignity isn't outdated, that facts still matter, that being strong doesn't mean being loud, it means being unmovable. And in a world full of noise, that message was finally heard, loud and clear. The story of Karoline Leavitt's confrontation with Jimmy Kimmel teaches us that true strength isn't about dominating a room with volume or charm, it's about standing firm in conviction when the odds are against you. In a world where media spin, sarcasm, and spectacle often drown out substance, Karoline showed that calm, composure, and unwavering facts still have the power to shift public perception. She didn't shout, retaliate, or play into theatrics. Instead, she spoke with precision, clarity, and quiet defiance, and in doing so captured the respect of both critics and supporters. The lesson is clear. You don't need to be loud to be heard, you don't need applause to speak the truth, and you don't need permission to defend the values that matter. For those who've felt overlooked, working-class Americans, older generations, anyone tired of being the punchline, Karoline's story is a reminder that courage can be measured not in volume, but in resilience. Walking away isn't always surrender. Sometimes it's the strongest move you can make. In an age of noise, this story stands as a powerful call to reclaim dignity, demand honesty, and never underestimate the quiet power of conviction.